And I'll turn it over to you, Sushrit.
Thank you, Ari. Hello, everybody. My name is Sushrut Athvel, and today I'm going to be talking a little about design and designing as a developer using examples in GoLang. First, let me give you a little bit about me. My name is Sushrut Athvel. I'm a software engineer at JFrog. I'm a DevOps developer. I've used a lot of Go. I've done a lot of front-end design as well. In my free time, I like to play games and watch movies and go on bike rides with my brother. And yeah, if you want to follow me, that's my Twitter account. So a little bit about why I wanted to talk about design and development today. So I used to work at Amazon. I did a short internship there, and during my time there, we had a whole design team that would tell us what to do, and then we would just implement that. And often our projects would come out as mediocre. Our users would give us mediocre reviews, and we couldn't figure out why. And we knew that it was something about the disconnect between what our design team was telling us and what we were actually developing on the front end. And so after that, I went and I learned some design principles, and then I went back and I figured out like, oh, the design team was trying to do certain things in their design. They're trying to follow certain rules. And as a developer, I was trying to follow my own rules. I was limited by the technology and the frameworks I was using at the time. And a lot of the time, what the design team built and what we could develop didn't match. And that disconnect was fatal for our project at Amazon. And in retrospect, there was things that we could have done if we had understood what the design team had actually, if we had understood a lot of the whys in their design process. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm going to use some examples in GoLang. Now, the basics of design can really be boiled down to some of these 7 facets of user experience. And these are coined by someone named Peter Morville. He is a graduate from the University of Michigan, and he has been in the industry for over 30 years. He has his own consulting company for design, and he's consulted for a lot of companies such as Google. He coined these 7 facets, and they're used and you'll find them all over the internet, all over books, and they're very good example of what user experience. They're a good set of guidelines for user experience. I'm going to be talking about these with some examples in GoLang. A lot of interfaces you use in GoLang will be, if it's on the server side, whoever is using your server, or if it's, I'm more going to be talking about something I've worked with, which is GoLang command line interfaces. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's start with the first facet of design, and that it needs to be useful. This one is fairly self-explanatory. Anything that is useful is something you should make, but also at the same time, don't forget when you're building something if it should be useful or not. There's a lot of things you can do with technology that's very cool, but it doesn't really have much use. One example is, I know a lot of developers, and myself included, when I first started learning Bash, I learned in other scripting languages. I learned that, like, wow, I can script everything. I can automate all of my tasks. And I ended up spending 4 hours once automating a task that you do once for 10 minutes. And in retrospect, that it's not worth automating that task on that small scale. And in a larger scale, it's just not, it's useful to me, but it's not really useful to the team. It's not really a useful piece of work I put out there. And in that sense, usefulness is in the eye of the beholder. So you really need to consider your customer, your users, and your colleagues when you're thinking about it. I have an image of a Nintendo game here, also called Eye of the Beholder, because games are something that are objectively, it doesn't have that much use, right? It's only used for entertainment. So for someone like me who really enjoys games, it is useful. But for someone like my parents, this is not a useful expenditure of time. So that's usefulness in its basics. The next facet, it should be usable. So useful means that people want to use your thing. Usable means that people can use your thing. Three examples of useful iPhone apps here: Robinhood, Venmo, and Uber. And they both disrupted industries that already existed by just making something that is more usable. Uber, for example, disrupted the taxi industry. It made calling for taxis than just, hey, you no longer have to do it on the street. And that made it people liked it for that reason. Venmo, there were peer-to-peer transaction services before this. There was PayPal, there was banks did peer-to-peer transactions, but it wasn't really usable for the average person. If you wanted to do a peer-to-peer transaction at a restaurant, you couldn't. And Venmo solved that problem while also making a really usable interface. Robinhood, they did retail investing. They did the same thing for retail investing these other two did, where they did something that people were doing before, but just made it far easier to use. So when you're thinking as a developer, when you're making something, really think about the things that your customers are going to want out of this, and really think about how it could be usable. In the Amazon example I used earlier, we would get a lot of feedback for this, that our product wasn't usable. It isn't easy to edit the images on the front end design task I used. And I really had to go back and look and see what the reason was. And that's because something that I had done a million times before, a customer couldn't do on the first try because I've never seen it before. So really take your time and test it. If you're developing a command line interface in Go, for example, have someone else on your team use it who hasn't seen it before, and sit there behind them and watch them as they try to use the feature you just developed. And you'll learn a lot from that. And it'll help develop a lot. Okay, so those first two facets. Facet number 3. Okay, this is where we start getting into more meaty facets. Findable is another measurable design facet that you can use. Findable is also referred to as discoverable in other communities online, and it generally relates to the organization of information and how to find your features in it. A great example of Findable is if you're building a command line interface like the kubectl or kube controller. You have you can just call kubectl help, and you have this list of basic commands and more commands past that, and then boom, all your commands are easily findable. You can figure out, man, I want to do something more intermediate. You go to the intermediate section, and then the explanation is there. More kubectl commands are there. Another really interesting way to make your stuff findable isn't just to make it easy, like something like this, but is to follow industry standards. So as a DevOps engineer, I have worked with Kubernetes a lot, and I've built products with previous companies that build on top of Kubernetes and interface with it. And so one thing we did was that when we were building our own command line interface on top of Kubernetes, was to follow the design standards that Kubernetes had established when they developed this controller. So this controller, if you want to build something, you do kubectl, create, and then the object you want to build, as opposed to the kubectl, the object you want, and then the action you're doing on top of it, which is also valid. I want to have an object that does this, or I want this object, I want to create it. We decided to follow the kubectl approach, whereas kubectl create this, and all of our CRUD operations were create, update, delete, and then the object afterwards. And when we tested that, because you can test that, we found that all of our customers it was really easy for them to figure out what was going on, and it was really easy for use our product, as opposed to when we did it the other way around, because they had worked with kubectl before, and that was the customer base we were targeting. That was also something that we didn't have a designer. That's something us as the development team had to choose ourselves, and it really helped improve our product there. So make things findable. The next facet, credible. Credibility, as opposed to the first two facets of usability and findability, is something that is intrinsic to your product. It is harder to measure than findability. If you want to test if something's findable, you give it to someone else and see if they can find the feature. But credibility is built on reputation. It's built on professionalism. One great way to make something credible is just pure professionalism in a presentation or documentation. You want straightforward messaging, minimal typos, etc. There are also industry standards for credibility. Something that people used to do was that they would provide documentation that you could download or you could print. But now if you have a documentation online that is something you download, people aren't going to trust that. People aren't going to want to use your product. Why do I have to download this documentation? Why isn't it publicly available? And a lot of developers see the world that way now. So people are expecting easily available documentation that is available on websites as opposed to something you download. Another example of credibility that I like is Cobra. Cobra is a framework I've used for GoLang before, and it helps you build command line interfaces. And the great thing about Cobra, and something that really helped it gain traction, is that it really tries to stick to the paradigms of Go. It's imperative, it keeps all the benefits of concurrency, and it's easy to learn. And because Cobra really stick to what Go was trying to do when it was built, all Go developers, at least the ones I've talked to, really like Cobra, because you can build credibility off of someone else who has also built credibility if you liken your product to theirs or attach your product with them. So then how, as a developer, do I build credibility in my tasks? Again, just like make sure everything's clean, proofread your projects, proofread your code. If anything's going to be open source, that means other people are going to read it. It means that, like don't put sloppy variables or stuff like that, because it matters when people are trying to contribute or add to open source projects. So that's credibility. It's facet number 4. Okay, facet number 5, desirable. This is another intrinsic design aspect. It's like credibility in that sense, where it's hard to measure if something is desirable. You can compare, you can do focus groups testing to see and give your products to 3 people, your product and 2 competitors to 3 people and see which one they choose, just based off of branding alone. But it's hard to test. And making something desirable is extremely important. One example I like to give is Tesla. Tesla has made e-vehicles. And people really see e-vehicles, at least over where I am in San Francisco, and Tesla's e-vehicle specifically as something that is like a status symbol. Like, hey, I'm a software engineer in the Bay, and I've made it when I've bought my first Tesla. But there's been a lot of objective reviews of Teslas around, and especially earlier, their internal interface kind of stinks. The one panel system isn't really easily usable. It's hard to figure out like how to change the temperature or do it if you haven't done it before, especially when you're driving. And so that is that was one of the things that really set Teslas apart, was they managed to set themselves as a desirable a brand, a company. So one example of something else in development that is really branded themselves as desirable is Go. Go is really desirable right now. According to a Hired report on Go on the state of software engineers in 2021, Go is a 2.3 times increase in interview requests for Go developers. They're really, really desired right now. And it's interesting because Go is super useful. It's a good technology, but it's not. There's a lot of things in Go that you can't do with other languages. Go is really good at the things it does, but what really helped set it apart was it was backed by Google. It was really easy to learn, and those paradigms made it desirable. And that desirability factor, that intrinsic value, is part of the reason, not all of the reason, but is part of the reason it's propelling out today. And that's why I learned Go last year and the year before. Okay. So accessible. This is, I like talking about this design aspect the most because there's a lot to discuss here. It's a very broad topic and it's often overlooked by folks. Accessibility can mean a lot of things. One of the things accessibility can mean is it can mean designing for disability, designing for folks who have disabilities. That is one of the things that making something more accessible can be. A lot of higher ups, product managers, CEOs, et cetera, will often say, hey, we don't have the resources to make something accessible. It's not worth the cost for the user base we may achieve from that. That in itself may be just a wrong idea. According to the latest census, 20% of Americans suffer from some kind of disability, whether that be vision impairment, hearing impairment, physical impairment, cognitive disabilities, etc. But that's 1 in 5 Americans. And if you aren't trying to make your product accessible, you're losing out on a lot of customer base. And this is something that a developer really has a lot of access to. But before I get to that, let's go through some examples of accessibility. So one really old example of accessibility is subtitles. Subtitles were made for people with hearing impairments who couldn't hear movies or TV. So it said, you know what, we can easily add subtitles to our TV shows. And that got a lot more people watching. But one cool thing about accessibility and this example subtitles is that making something more accessible will make something way more usable as well. And they found that with subtitles. A lot of people use subtitles who aren't hearing impaired because subtitles are just a generally good feature. Another example of this is the Xbox accessible controller in the bottom right here. This controller was made by Xbox for people with physical and cognitive disabilities to be able to play their games. They got more sales for it, they got more public declarations for it, and something they else found is that this controller is highly customizable. It can really be adapted to suit whatever your needs are and wherever your hands are, or wherever your feet are, etc. It can be used by a wide range of people, but it can also be used in development of robots. A lot of robotics companies love the accessible controller because it has a lot of buttons. It has a lot of buttons you can customize and reprogram very easily. And it's a solid working controller. And that's another example of accessibility being used to create something greater. Example for GoLang. GoLang wanted to be easy to learn as one of their paradigms. And so one thing that isn't in GoLang is the ternary operator. In other languages, you can do a Boolean expression, and then depending on the falseness or truthiness of it, you can do one or the other expression all in one line. But the ternary operator is difficult to understand for a beginner. It's after you learn it, it's hard to read. It's controversial actually when in development communities because a lot of people like it, a lot of people don't like it. GoLang said, no, we want to be easy to learn and easy to read. And we think the ternary operator violates those paradigms. So they purposely left it out of the language in deference to just a simple if else. And that's one way they made things accessible. So when you're thinking as a developer, and you're getting a design and you wonder why something might be there, it might be because it's accessible. But even as a developer, you can think of things like, hey, I can build this in a certain way, or think about try and think about what happens if you only had one hand, or if you're colorblind. Colorblindness is a really easy thing to design accessibility features to. You just change the colors and use color palettes that are suited for colorblind individuals. And with that, you'll get a lot of positive PR. You'll get a lot of good user feedback from it. That's accessible. Last one is valuable. This is the last one. You should make something that is valuable. That it's very much the capitalism in product making. If you want to build something, you need people to come to you. You need to be able to sell it to them. You need something that needs to be valuable to switch. And so when you're developing a new feature, it's important to determine whether or not this is an actual valuable thing. One of the easiest examples of something that's valuable is Google. And Google solved like, hey, I want to search something, and then they built their search bar. But the interesting thing about this Google homepage is that it's changed very little since when it was open, because Google knows that the most valuable thing about their homepage is the search bar. So that's why they don't clutter their homepage with very little other than just their search bar. They added some voice features, they added bookmarks to the bottom, but the thing that's most permanent is their search bar because they know that's most valuable. As a developer, I found myself thinking a lot of the time, great, I'm making a valuable product. I'm adding the value to the company with my development work, but I don't think there's much I can do past that. And the interesting part about that is that value can often be measured in terms of cost as well. The product manager is the one determining which features to be done. But as a developer, I'm the one determining how much that feature costs. In agile systems, for example, I'm the one who's giving it story points. I'm saying that this is going to take 13 story points of times. I'm the one who's saying that this is going to take a lot of cloud resources. And it is up to me in that sense to determine cost. When we're ever giving all those estimates, we are determining cost. And when I realized that means I have control in adding more value to the company through effectively managing that cost. I'm not just giving an estimate for the future. If I can figure out some other way to do the same thing the designer did that is lower cost, I'm adding value to the company. If a designer wants me to do something that I can't technically do in my Go system, for example, Go doesn't do the exact thing they want, but I can figure out another way to do that with the tools I have available and lower costs, then I'm going to remove a lot of those disconnects from design and product. And they just want you to be able to, they decide what's valuable and you get to decide how valuable it is. And once I realized that, I started to be able to really I gained a lot more confidence in myself when I was pushing back on some things product was saying. When I was saying, hey, I think this will cost too much. I think we should do this other way. And I knew that would resonate with them because I was talking in terms of value here. So those are the 7 facets. And individually, they're fairly easy to understand. They're fairly easy to work with. I can make something more valuable or findable. But the interesting thing about these design facets is that they have to work together, and you have to make decisions based on what you know of your user base on what's more findable. A great example is AWS. AWS, in my opinion, is very confusing to read when you first start using it. You log into the AWS console and you click on the left or top left somewhere and see all the products and all the things you can use. And you get a huge list of all 1,500 things you can do in AWS. And for someone who just never used it before, it's really hard to find things in AWS. But the beginner is not who AWS is targeting. AWS is really targeting companies. They really want to sell infrastructure as a service. And so for those people, most of their user base is customers, and AWS understands that. So they care way more about their platform being useful and usable as opposed to findable. Something I can liken it to is a pilot's cockpit. When a pilot is flying a plane, there's 1,000,001 buttons in the front of a cockpit. And I have no idea what it does, but a pilot knows what every one of those buttons does, and it's really easy for him to just press every single one of them. It's really usable for the pilot because every task has one button specifically for it. And then AWS is a lot like that. If you want to do X thing, you just click X thing, and it's not obfuscated by something. If you wanted to make something, and so it's not like that. It's an interesting you could make the argument that it's findable as opposed to usable. But anyway, one other thing that you could do with usable is you could obfuscate information. You could hide all those AWS things, and it could be 1, 2, 3, only 5 things you can see at something, and so you can find those 5 things really easily. But it's not very usable because you can't, if you wanted to do more than just those 5 things, it's all in the background and you have to really dig deep to it. So that's the trade-off that Amazon chose. They decided for usability over findability. And when you're looking at more than one facet all at once, it all starts to get like, oh, okay. And then that's where the developer comes in, because a lot of the times developers are separated from their customers. But in the DevOps industry, for example, I'm a DevOps developer, but I'm also a DevOps user. So I know the pain points of a developer, and I can make the case to my designers, to my product team that, hey, if I was a developer here, if I was using this GoLang server, I wouldn't want it like this. If I was using the CLI, I wouldn't want it like this, because I think most people who use our products are experts. And I think we should more focus on usability here as opposed to findability, etc. And so that's where all these facets come together, and that's where you as a developer can really help build better products and remove some of those fatal disconnects and make it so that you're and really like push forward so that you can become a better developer. And more with and get more well-versed, better design products. So those are the 7 facets of user experience. They're the basics of design. A lot of people talk about them online now. There's a lot of different ideas in design, and they all rotate around these ideas now. Like I said before, Peter Morville was the one who I got this blog, I got this information from, and I learned about him when I was taking some classes as well. If you want to learn more directly from him, his company is called Semantic Studios, and the blog post where he first talked about some of this stuff is linked here, User Experience Design. If you are curious about design in general for architecture and developers, you can look at some of these design books he made. They dive deeper into some of these facets. For example, Search Patterns Designed for Discovery is all about the findable. And then a book I really like by Dan Norman is called The Design of Everyday Things. And it is not a technical book. He talks about the design of everyday things you see, like doors, coffee mugs, chairs, tissue boxes, markers, and everything. He really delves deep into how those things were designed and some earlier designs of Terrible. And he really talks about, like, man, imagine if a coffee pot had the handle and the spout on the same side. Why would you ever want to do that? And he makes a case for it and then demolishes it because you don't want to get hot coffee in your hands. But yeah, if you want more information, that's there. But then other than that, like, thank you everybody for having me today. And if you have some questions, please feel free to ask. Read the chat here.
Well, that was really, really great, Sushrit. Thank you so much. I think that you really gave some really, really important insights tonight, and I think a lot of people appreciated that. Is this the first time you've given that talk?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, gosh, geez. And man, I'd hate to be the speaker that has to follow this talk. Geez, I guess I am, but really, really, a really awesome job. What questions do we have? I saw one question in the chat a little earlier, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to mention it, do it justice in context from John. Was the Go increase for Go after the visual rebrand? Do you have enough information there to answer that?
I don't have enough information. I can give you more information on the hired report. So the hired report was finished in 2021, about 2020 as a year and a whole. So I don't remember the exact year the Go rebrand done. They didn't do any study in there as to actually figuring out why. They just reported that people wanted more Go developers.
Gotcha. That's okay, John. Did you want to come off mute and answer? Or ask, rather?
Yeah, that did answer my question. It wasn't there wasn't a connection to the visual rebrand making an increase. It was just that it was a popular language. So that does answer it. Thank you.
Gotcha. Anybody else have any questions for Sushrit tonight? Going once? going twice. Okay, well, awesome. Well, if you think of any before the end of the presentations this evening, please don't hesitate to ask. And Shushrut, really awesome job, and thank you so much for sharing with us your insights tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to your talk.
Awesome, thanks. Well, let me go ahead and I will do my best to stop. Let's see here, start my screen share. So let's see here. Great. So I know that some of you have been coming consistently to the group. I've been involved for the last year or so in helping co-organize GoLang New York, and it's really been awesome. But before I had the opportunity to join the developer relations team at JFrog, I spent about 23 years as a technical recruiter in the staffing industry, everything from doing hands-on production recruiting to leading a team to training a team. I even held the title Chief Recruiting Officer at one point in time as well. So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is choosing a technical recruiter that's worth your time. And I probably don't have to say much more than that for those who are in the industry and get contacted so often. But just a little bit about myself. I mentioned that I was doing recruiting for a long time, and I have also started assisting the Go San Francisco group in terms of trying to relaunch some of their activities as we hopefully get out of this pandemic in the virtual environment and move back to a face-to-face. I do work for JFrog, and my actual title is Meetup Event Manager. So I guess it's really safe to say that meetups are a good portion of my life. So really enjoyed them. I've probably sat in about 300 in the last 2 years, and just really enjoyed that opportunity to be part of different communities globally. And as some of you may know or may not know, I am best known for being the father of many. I have the privilege of being the father of 7 children. So that seems to be unique these days. And usually some of the follow-up questions are about my 7 kids and not necessarily what I spoke about. And if you have some of those questions, that's fine too. So with that being said, I want to just share the QR code for those who came late. Tonight, you will be able to see my slides and Shushrut's slides on the link that you see here. And the first 15 people to come in and fill out a raffle form tonight. It's not really a raffle. If you fill out the form, we're going to send you our annual JFrog limited edition t-shirt, as well as a copy of the Liquid software book on DevOps. So it's something that we are excited to give out to the community. And I don't believe, again, we've given out a t-shirt this year to GoLang New York. So this is great. I also have some talking point sources. So the things I'm going to mention tonight, in case you want to look them up yourself. In fact, you probably will want to look up some of the stats yourself. You'll be able to see that on the page also. So you'll also see both my slides and Shushrut's slides, and we'll eventually post the video. So that being said, one of the common questions that we ask at JFrog before we really get involved in anything is, what's the why? Why am I even here talking about this tonight? And the reason is because, a lot of times we get so many calls from whether it be telemarketers or for technologist recruiters. And a lot of times we just kind of go into processes for opportunities and interviews with maybe not a lot of consideration in terms of who is actually representing you. And the way I look at this topic is, if you were going to hire an accountant, or if you were going to hire a doctor or a lawyer to represent you professionally, you'd probably want to interview them a little bit. So I want to talk to you a little bit tonight about how to choose a technical recruiter really that's worth your time, how to get past all the noise that you see and really pick people that are going to represent you well, especially in something so important as your professional life. One of the things about software development that's really great, especially for all of those here tonight who are part of the community, is I'm assuming that you've entered this profession because it truly is something that you love. And I know that I've had the privilege of working jobs that I love almost my entire career. And in saying that, That's really, really important because, as they say, if you love what you do, then you really aren't like working. You're kind of just really living your life. And I've really had a unique privilege to do that. And I hope that you have that opportunity as well with whatever you're doing right now. So being able to pick somebody that's going to help guide your career, especially taking you from one step to the next, if that's even something that's important to you, is really, really something that needs to be considered and thoughtfully. So we're going to look at a few of those things. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to share a little bit about what's going on in the job market a little bit today. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have ever heard of CBRE, but CBRE is a commercial real estate company that does extensive research on the technology industry. In fact, when companies like Amazon and Google are thinking about opening a satellite office, they're going to consult CBRE most likely, or another company of its stature, to see how the market is for them to be able to place an office there. What type of technical population is there to support that environment? So CBRE every year comes out with something called their scoring their tech talent, and New York ranked number 5 in the top 50 places for companies to have a satellite office. And that's based on many, many different factors. It's based on the number of schools, the number of technologists that are anticipated to graduate within a particular time, the number of existing technology professionals that are already there, the cost of real estate, and the other companies that have invested in real estate in the area. So New York is listed as number 5. So for those of you, and as I believe most people here tonight or part of the GoLang New York group are in New York or the New York metropolitan areas, it's important to know that you are in a really, really good location as it relates to the tech industry. Just a couple things. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Dice. Most people think of Dice, oh yeah, that's just a job board. But Dice actually, especially for a technical recruiter, is much, much more resourceful than just a job board. Sure, there's resumes out there, and sure, we can put job postings out there. But Dice invests quite a bit of money in doing a lot of research on IT professionals, because that's the entire job board focus. So when you go to other job boards like monster.com and Career Builder, they're more of a general job board. But Dice is primarily focused in information technology. So it's always been a great resource to me, especially as it relates to some of their research and highlights. Today, I did a little search on Dice to find out how many jobs were posted just in the New York metropolitan area within a 50-mile radius. And today there are 6,835 full-time jobs, followed by 5,148 contract jobs posted just in the last 7 days. So that should give you some idea about the IT demand that's in the marketplace right now. As far as Go developer opportunities within those job listings, there were 609 full-time opportunities and 437 contract opportunities. Now, let me clarify that a little bit. Just because this does include jobs that Go appears in the search. So I want to make sure that that's very clear, that if it doesn't mean that Go is the core language. A lot of times you'll see that you can have one language and they list Go secondarily. But the bottom line is Go is an important enough language in the ecosystem of technology these days that it is ranked very high. In fact, if you look at the percentage of jobs, nearly 10% of all full-time jobs, Go was listed in the description as a important skill set or a good skill set to have. So just some insight there in reference to what the current demand is in the marketplace. Something else that Dice does really, really well, and again, this is not a Dice.com commercial, but again, it's just one resource. It's one resource which has some great information. Is Dice puts out about a 2021 salary survey. They do this every year. There's a lot of great surveys out there. Glassdoor does one. Robert Half does a really, really good one. And I think also there is one of the big four consulting companies. I just don't remember which one puts out a really, really solid one as well. New York, in New York, the average IT salary is $114,274. Now, keep in mind that that is for both the help desk profession all the way up through the IT manager and everything in between. So if it sounds like it's low, well, you know, it all depends on perspective. And this is typically somebody mid-career experience. Obviously, most people don't come out of school making that much. And at the same time, if you have more than 5 to 6 years experience, chances are you may be making more. So just something to consider. And by the way, this salary is up 11.67% from last year. So because of the demand for technical skills, it is on the rise. Go average salaries nationally, by the way, were 128K. And that's not New York only. That is on a national basis. So Go, I believe, was ranked number 2 in terms of skill sets for developers to have. So while it's not necessarily the most widely used development language, it's not the biggest population of developers. This is probably a good indicator as to why the salaries may be above other development languages where there may be, for example, more people available within that particular skill set. So it's got enough. It definitely has enough traction to be dangerous, and of course something to be beneficial for people who are focused in Go software engineering. So I wanted to share that for you, because the question is, what does this mean for Go developers, and what does this do to what does this make you in the marketplace? And what that does is that puts a huge target on your chest, and technical recruiters are looking for you. And I probably am not sharing anything you don't know. If you have a LinkedIn profile, if you ever accidentally posted a resume and it was only an accident after your voicemail was full, you realize that you are being sought after and that recruiters really, really want to get in touch with you. And recruiters come in all shapes, sizes, and different pedigrees, but they're looking for you for the jobs that they have open, because there's no secret that the IT and especially the software development field is very, very, very short in supply of great developers and a lot of opportunities available. So you get home from work, or you're probably working from home. So you actually check your personal email, and your LinkedIn is full of messages, your Gmail is clogged, your voicemail, if you have a voicemail, and hopefully you're using Google Voice to screen it by now, is full. And by the way, your text messages are full, all of opportunities. The best opportunity of your life is in front of you, and the recruiters are reaching out. So it's a lot. The problem is there's a lot of noise. Because here's the thing, you always want to be careful. You don't want to throw out, the old. I'm going to sound such like an old fogey, but you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? You want to make sure that if there's some really good career changing things taking place, you don't want to throw that away with all the noise. So how do you evaluate that? So today we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about that some more. Now, there are 2 types of technical recruiters, agency and corporate. I like to divide them into those 2 categories. Some may have other categories, but the agency technical recruiter, and that's where I came from, the agency side. That's where you hear the term headhunter, or that's where recruiters are paid usually a base salary, but also there's a heavy commission associated with placing you. So there's a lot of incentive for recruiters to do a good job on your behalf. Corporate recruiters are the ones that wave the company flag, like they're calling you from Google, Amazon, Twitter, and they're looking to hire you. And there's some great corporate recruiters too. In fact, many of the best corporate recruiters actually started out in an agency environment, and they transferred that skill set into the corporate world. So there's the difference, but we're going to focus primarily on agency recruiters tonight. And we're going to talk about the ones that are probably leaving most of the messages, whether it be text or voicemail or email for you. And we're going to talk about 5 tips on selecting the best recruiters to work with. Now, here's something which is, it almost doesn't sound crazy, but how many of you have ever asked a colleague for a recruiting referral? You know, we ask friends for doctors referrals, lawyers referrals, accounting referrals. But have you ever, and I use the word DevOps here, so I didn't mean to do that. But basically, for a software development colleague, have you asked them for a referral to a recruiter that maybe placed you in the past if you're looking for a new opportunity? Rather than the recruiter finding you, you getting a referral from a friend or a colleague is really, really great. And I'll tell you why. Because when I was a recruiter, the best thing that could ever happen was getting a referral from somebody I had placed before. And what that means is that a lot of the biggest complaint about the technical recruiting industry is if you see a job on the web that you want to apply to and you reach out to the recruiter, a lot of times you never hear back from them, no matter how qualified you are.
Like a foundation for where these enterprise cloud patterns build from. So when we think of a monolith.
Thanks, Mike. And when you have when you get a referral though to a recruiter, you are going to get a callback and you're going to be hopefully treated like gold, because when you're a referral from a colleague, you're going to get the career advice expertise that you need. Recruiters are inundated right now with applications. And I'll tell you, 80% of the applications usually are not qualified for the job they're applying for. And what happens is the recruiter gets inundated and they sometimes, through all the noise, don't get back to the best qualified people. So when you get that referral, asking a colleague is on the best recruiter they ever worked with, especially someone that's placed you as the Go developer. That's always going to be probably the first and best route you want to take. So screen your emails and voicemails. Now, this is important. You know, this is a very common, hi, this is Bill from ABC Tech. I have your dream job, yada, yada, yada. Give me a call back. And you never hear from Bill again. He's just dialing for dollars and he's trying to get in touch with you. That's a pretty stale, generic message that you're going to get from most recruiters in voicemail and in your email. What you want to look for is look for the recruiter that has spent some time looking at your profile and learning more about you. And a good recruiter will also be able to look at your background and determine not what you're doing right now, but what you probably want to be. If you're a developer and they have that architect position open that you're just about ready to advance to, they're going to be able to look at your background and say, huh, this person's ready for that. I know they're going to be interested in it. Are they spending time looking at what you probably want to do and what benefit there is in it for you? The generic job description, email and voicemail, avoid them. It's not a good use of time. Chances are the recruiter has no relationship with the people that they are representing if they're leaving that kind of message for you. But if they look at your profile, if they've inspected your GitHub account to know what you're contributing to, and if they clearly spent time to learn about who you are, that's at least worth a phone call of your time to determine whether they truly do have something which can be unique for your career. And the good news is, even if it's not a right match for the time, someone like that is going to be able to be in touch with you for future opportunities, and they're going to be a good career resource for the future. Number 3, I want you to consider interviewing the technical recruiter. You know, isn't it great when recruiters call you? I'm sure that many of you have gotten that phone call from the recruiter and they get you on the phone and they start talking to you like they ask you all these personal questions within the first 2 minutes. Hi, how much do you make? And all these other questions and all the other questions associated with that. And they just, you know, it's like they're right on top of every personal question that they can ask you about you and your life, and you don't know anything about them. You should turn the tables. And I always respected that when candidates would ask me questions about my credentials in placing them. So for example, a very common and easy question to answer is, how many Go programmers have you placed in the last 2 years? Have they ever placed a Go developer? Do they know anything about Go? It doesn't necessarily, if they have never placed a Go developer before, you know, that's okay. But how they answer and field that question is going to be really, really important. Are they talking to somebody that's truly, are you talking to somebody rather that's truly engaged with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis from a technology standpoint? Do they understand the market? Do they understand your career path and desires just by looking at what you've done before and having some clue? Or is it just kind of like you're talking to somebody that just doesn't get it? You'll be able to clearly know that through these interview questions. Another good question that you should ask, and this is really important, is how many placements have you made with the company you're calling me about? You know, if there is it a new client? A new client is fine. But if you're talking to somebody that says, I've placed about 20 people with this particular hiring manager, you may want to listen, because this recruiter knows what this manager is looking for. So they're not just representing a job description, they're truly representing a career path. And that's something that should be considered in their credibility. Does your company have a relationship with the hiring manager is also a great question. Are they just kind of like getting it from some vendor management system and then the recruiters are just dialing for dollars? You probably have gotten those calls where 10 recruiters call you within 5 minutes about the same job. That's because like a big company like Comcast or AT&T just released the job through the system, and all the recruiters start dialing, and your keywords were great for it, and they're all calling you about the same job. Well, you know, it's one thing if the value that a recruiter from an agency is going to bring to you is if they actually have a relationship with the person making the hiring decision. Otherwise, there's really, what value is there to you? Are they really truly bringing you an opportunity that you couldn't land upon yourself if you didn't see it? So it's something to consider when you're asking the recruiters some questions. But again, all the questions, there's no right or wrong answer to these questions. It's how the recruiter answers the questions to determine whether they are truly engaged with what they're doing and if they can provide any value to you in your career. So here's the other thing: assess customer service rating. So I like to think, I always like to think of the recruiting industry as like the hospitality industry. Now, on my left, I have like a Motel 8, right? It has a bed, it has a television, it probably has some source of food that you can ask for. It has, it has the basics, it has a restroom and so forth. Well, if you look to your right, I think that's the Bellagio, if I'm not mistaken. That's a 5-star hotel. It also has a bed, a television, a restroom, and certainly a source of food as well. But how are you being treated in that conversation is really, really important. How you're being communicated with, the level of customer service. You want to make sure that the person representing you is doing so in a way that is worthy of your background and career. This is your life, and this is something you're passionate about. Don't just hand it over to anybody that may be able to just submit you to jobs. As a recruiter, I never would submit anyone to a client without their permission, and make sure that anyone that you work with is going to be very, very upfront with you about who their client is and how you're being represented. If they're not willing to do that, you want nothing to do with that individual. That individual is not a good use of your time. So make sure you're getting the 5-star service that you deserve and that your career is worthy of. So LinkedIn recommendations. So LinkedIn is a pretty awesome tool. LinkedIn is sometimes known by some as a job board. I mean, as recruiters all live in LinkedIn. It's not the only source they use by any means, but it's a really, really important tool that we all use. Here's a recommendation that was left for me by somebody that I've placed 5 times in my career. And he's a great technologist. But what I will say is this, is that when you're talking to a recruiter, check out their LinkedIn profile to see if anyone's ever recommended them. If they've never been recommended by anybody and they've been in the industry for 10 years, that's a red flag. That means that no client, no candidate, or even somebody that didn't place. Those were always my favorite recommendations, was people that I didn't even place that I've had 20-year relationships with. They would leave me a recommendation because of the consultation time we had together. All of those things are really, really important. Are you working with somebody that's reviewed well and can benefit you? It's not the number one indicator, but it certainly is some indication whether it's a good use of your time to work with that individual. So that's 5. Those are 5 things to consider when you get contacted by a recruiter, and try to weed through all the noise, because really you are in demand from a skill set standpoint because of the profession you have chosen. That's awesome. There's a lot of great things that go along with that, but you do not need to be the victim of not using your time wisely with who you choose to associate with, especially as it relates to those who are representing your career. So I'm going to stop my share right now and see if there's anybody that you have that has any questions about either with anything I spoke about tonight or Shushrut. And by the way, even if I didn't touch on the topic this evening, feel free to ask me as well. I'm happy to be an open book as it relates to the technical recruiting space and so forth. Anybody? Do we have anything in the chat here? But my best advice on finding developer job is to head to Twitter. Yeah, and you know, one of the things that's important, I think that actually, Mihai, this is good advice. The people that spend time, especially at user groups like this, I would say have less need, especially when you meet people in person, not that virtual is bad, but have less need than people who don't come to groups like this for a recruiter, because you're networking with technologists in your space. So for example, if I'm at a Go user group and I am with Nick, and I know that Nick is an awesome, and I know that my company is looking for a good developer, I may say, you know what, I go to the user group with Nick. He's probably somebody I'd rather talk to about this job. I know him. I feel confident in representing him. So there's a good networking that takes place. So the best career move, even above what Mihai had mentioned, even though I think these are good sources, is the networking that you do within your technology community, period, is number one. You all could be binge watching on Netflix right now. You may be doing that while I'm talking. That's fine too. But but the choice you made to be part of a community tonight is different than those who are doing other things and are not taking that time to network. So kudos to you in that choice. But thanks for that note. But I do agree that there's some great channels out there and lots of tools if you want to take that. But recruiters can be very, very valuable. They have relationships that are available only based on what their company has spent millions of dollars on, and that building that relationship with hiring managers, which can be very, very unique opportunities that that individual may have exclusively. So that's something to consider as well. Any questions or thoughts regarding this tonight?
Hey, Mihai here.
Hey,
so,
Mihai.
Actually, you missed the last sentence I mentioned, which is finally give a few talks at meetups, which I think.
Okay, great. Oh, and by the way, I thought you're correct. And by the way, I think what your points there are awesome in what that you mentioned. So thanks for doing that. So definitely in support of what you said. But I love how you covered that point as well. Is it worth it to reach out to corporate recruiters when applying for jobs, or does it really not affect your application viability? That's a really good question. I would say that corporate recruiters are really, really good at what they do. Typically, they are working directly with the hiring manager. They know what they want. They know what they don't want. I would say that it's hit or miss. I know that some people have had amazing experiences with awesome corporate recruiters. Then there's others that are so inundated with the workload that frankly, a piece of gold could fall right in front of them and they wouldn't see it just because they have so much workload going on. Typically, if you have a referral within a company, that's always the best source. If you're targeting a particular company, if you have a past colleague and so forth. But I would say that it's one of those things where if you have your mindset that this is a company you want to join, especially if that person's engaging with you on LinkedIn, a corporate recruiter is definitely a good route to go. However, if a agency recruiter calls you about a job, that sometimes can be an advantage, because a lot of times the hiring managers aren't necessarily enthralled with the corporate recruiter's response time. And that's important. So what they do is they utilize the agencies to supplement the overloaded corporate recruiter. So a lot of times the hiring manager is willing to spend more time with the agency and be more specific about what their need is. And a good agency recruiter is going to specifically target that. So if I say I've placed 20 people with this hiring manager, your ears should perk up, because that means I know what they're looking for, and there's a reason for that success. So that's a really great question. Hopefully that answers your question.
Actually, if I may cut in there to dovetail on what you said, it's so important that people look at their LinkedIn and look at their CV and make sure it reflects their actual level. Because when people, like, let's say a recruiter is going to go to a hiring manager and say, hey, this is the person's CV, you will be, at that very moment, you will be ranked at a certain level. It'll be very hard for you to level up from that level during the interview, rather than coming in at the appropriate level and then making sure that people like treat you as somebody who's going to be like a senior or like a principal person or whatever, you know.
That's a really good point. I appreciate you pointing that. Nick here is a corporate recruiter, and Nick, you can come off mute too. I like corporate recruiters a lot. But you know, I did promote you to developer in my example, though. I thought you should have been pretty impressed by that. But Nick makes a point. As a corporate recruiter myself, you're reaching, you know, make sure that you're reaching out to the right contact. If you're looking for an internship, try to reach out to the university recruiter, not the executive search recruiter. Don't outsmart yourself, as I think what he's trying to say. A lot of times people think with technology, you can just, you know, find your way in through different routes. And a lot of times you can also hurt yourself at the same time if you're ultra aggressive and you don't let the systems in place work for you. So that's important. There's a lot of, you know, many recruiting departments really set the stage for what's allowed in terms of the recruiting process within the organizations. And especially if you're targeting a particular company, you want to make sure that those are respected. And of course, sometimes we're impatient in the world of microwave ovens. We even call them ovens anymore. Microwaves and fast fast speed for everything. It can be a little bit difficult to be patient, especially if you truly are looking for a job aggressively. Time passes very, very slowly. And let's see here. And yeah, you don't want to definitely want to message the wrong recruiter. And if you do, so what? They'll refer you as well. Obviously, you're showing interest, and that's something that's important. But doing your research is really key. And I think that's the point, and it's well taken. Anybody else? Anyone have any specific examples? Any questions from experiences they had in past job searches that may benefit the rest of the community here tonight? Going once, going twice. Okay. Andy, you going to say something?
Oh, I guess I was actually. I mean, okay. I guess a question that I have is, I mean, one of the things that we Go programmers are experiencing now is that because of the demand for our services, we're always working.
Yes.
Which is good, right? It means that, you know, that the time, the past times when you'd lose your job and spend a couple of months sort of off trying to find a job, it seems like those months are gone now.
Sure.
But I think that also means that Go developers are looking to move, right? And I guess a broad question that I have is, when do you feel like in your current position, if you're interested in moving, thinking about moving, you should start to reach out to recruiters, participate in this stuff that you're talking about, and what are gotchas and caveats to look out for when you're doing that?
Sure. So when I was the last recruiting company I worked for, I'm going to give you an acronym. This acronym hopefully will be helpful for you. I used to call it the TLC4, okay? TLC4, and that stood for this: the technology that you're passionate about, the leadership you're willing to work under, and the 4 C's are career path, culture, commute, and compensation. The answer to those 6 questions are determining, and how each of those items rank in your life at a given time is going to determine whether you're going to stay or whether you're going to leave. If you're satisfied in all of those areas, and and all of those areas needs are being met, you really are almost what I would refer to as unrecruitable. And that's great. But if there's something, for example, you find out that this is a lot of reason why people leave companies is because of their boss. If people don't leave companies, they leave bosses. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. If your leadership is bad and you don't trust the leadership you're working under, that is a huge motivating factor to leave, and probably one of the biggest ones out there. If that's weighing heavy on you, chances are that's when you start looking. If you realize you're being paid $50,000 under the market, that's sometimes a big enough trigger to make a move. So it really all depends. Your TLC4 and how all of those rank at a given time is going to determine whether you should probably do that or not. If you're busy working, if you're contributing, if you're getting a lot of satisfaction, here's the bottom line. It can't all be about the money. In fact, it's not all about the money, because what happens is that there's so many other factors about a career that are important. And what happens is, if your needs are being met and you're really enjoying yourself, why make the change? Unless it's just, if they're offering you like a once in a lifetime Captain Kirk get on a spaceship opportunity. I mean, there's maybe no reason to look for that next opportunity. But if one of those needs aren't being met, chances are it's worth exploring for yourself. Does that answer your question?
I think it does.
Okay. If it didn't, by the way, I wasted a lot. I just spent a lot of time talking about it.
No, I think an extension to that question is, I mean, another consequence of this constant work cycle that we're in is, that we'll be on a 2-year job stint, and
Yep.
then, we might switch jobs.
Mhm.
My personal experience has been that it takes me a few months of searching to find a place that has all of these characteristics that you just described.
Right.
As a fraction of 2 years, 3 months, it's actually a pretty big fraction, right? I mean, basically that's, and my success at that, which hasn't been spectacular, indicates to me that maybe I need to be in contact with recruiters earlier than I might think. Maybe I need to be in kind of contact with recruiters all the time. I'm not even sure, actually. I'm not intending to waste anyone's time. I'm not trying to represent that I'm interested in moving when I'm not. But I guess at the same time, I am interested in sort of, when do you become as a job seeker, when do you become an truly active participant in this relationship?
Well, when you build, I showed you an example of somebody I've placed 5 times. And I have other examples of people that I've placed 3 times, 4 times in the course of 20 years as well. One of the things that you want to do is you want to be that, when you do the appropriate screening, because you're getting reached out to regularly, I'm assuming, by technical recruiters. Or if you adjust your LinkedIn profile and make it clear that if you beef it up some with a resume, it's going to be something that's going to bring some noise to you. You just have to be able to weed through some of that, and then when you see, and then get in touch with the people that stand out to you as who can be a benefit to you, because a good recruiter is not thinking of a quick hit all the time. Those are the 1 to 2 year recruiters. They're thinking of, if I don't place somebody, I'm going to lose my job and I'm going to lose my career. That's what they're thinking about. But somebody that's well entrenched in the technology space, they're thinking, I don't have a job for Andy right now, but I know 5 of my potential clients here in the New York metropolitan area, they need somebody like him. So having that relationship in place, you're going to want to have maybe 1 to 2 confidants that can always have an eye out for you, so you can focus on your development and they can focus on what they do, if you're going to utilize a recruiting service, if that's helpful. But it should almost be like a regular passive thing, but don't overdo it. Otherwise, I know people that are saturated with too many recruiters and too many submissions. And when companies receive a person's resume, they're like, oh yeah, we've only seen that resume 20 times in the last 10 years, not interested. You want to be really careful about that. Any other questions or thoughts on these tonight? Okay, cool. Well, I really appreciate everyone coming out tonight. I really enjoyed Sushrut's talk, and thanks for putting up with mine, and I'd like to see about. Let me see here. Let me stop the recording.